All right, before I get started, a couple announcements. Jason's here from SCLS. A couple announcements on what's available. We're going to also make announcements because, as I said in the beginning of class, I really want this Moorad Sports Center to encompass a lot of different areas of sports around campus and obviously in the law school between the Moorad Sports Journal, between SCLS, between my fellows, between what I'm doing and my media stuff. So there's going to be a lot of coordination with all of these groups, and Jason is one of the leaders from SCLS. Are we dropping the E?
I think that might be it.
I think we're dropping entertainment, because we're sports all the time, like radio, right? So I'm going to let Jason have a couple announcements.
Hey guys, just quickly, so Meg Lane and Jody Tallarico and I run the Sports Law Society blog. So basically, it's what the name says. So it's a blog dedicated to covering sports law issues and writing opinion pieces on sports law. And so we wanted to kind of use this class and open up an opportunity for anyone in the class to write for the blog this semester. So it's a little bit different than the Moorad Sports Journal blog. That's citing more sources, kind of getting deeper into certain issues. And so the Sports Law Society blog is kind of blog-based and opinion-based. And so we wanted to give a chance to anyone who might not have a forum to write about sports law, a chance to write. So if you guys, if anyone's interested, please reach out to us and stop us in class, and we'd be more than happy to have you and give you a forum to write. And so we're on Twitter, and I'm sure Mr. Brandt will kind of retweet your stuff throughout the semester if you choose to write. So we're kind of becoming a good forum among different law schools for sports law issues.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, let me echo that, because what our goal is here, and I think we've started this already, is to have a website that will be the website that if you were taking a sports law class in California or Oregon or Colorado or Texas, this is the place you want to go. You want to go to the Moorad Sports Journal, Moorad Center site that's going to have all these blog posts written by people like you. And what we do is Jason and his staff kind of weed out the good writing and do some copy editing, and we'll put it up there. And it'll be up there on the same page as my stuff from Sports Illustrated. Now, of course, my stuff is going to be on the Sports Illustrated page, but also here. So we're going to have an opportunity, if you have a passion for subjects that you want to write about, let's get it out there. And these are ways I get asked all the time, how can I do more in sports here? Because the center is why I came here. And here's an opportunity to really sort of show what you got in terms of writing. And as I said last time, when I talk to young people interested in sports is, can you communicate? And a big part of that is, can you write? Can you take a topic, synthesize it, write it? Doesn't have to be long. Again, we don't put word limits. When I write my columns, it's anywhere from 800 to 2,000 words, pretty broad. And that's kind of a broad angle. And as Jason said, we also have people on the Sports Journal writing articles that are a little more academic and in-depth, but not as academic and in-depth as hard copy journal articles that go on for 40 pages. So we have all different levels of writing. I do want it to be the blog that Jason's talking about, to be a little more pop than an academic writing, but I keep saying this is not sports radio. We're not going to talk about who's going to win the World Series. We're not going to talk about who's going to win the Super Bowl. We're not going to talk about what coach is getting fired. We're going to talk about deeper issues, and they're all out there. Which of course segues to what we're going to do today, which is this constant struggle I have that I mentioned last time, where I could spend the entire class talking about current events, as you could, and telling stories that relate to that. But we have the historical stuff we have to do about commissioner powers. We start to get in the first topic. So obviously this week has been nothing short of exactly what I keep talking about, sports law changing in front of our eyes. I just look at my own media for the past week. On Wednesday and Thursday, I was talking about Joey Bosa and the Chargers. On Friday and Saturday, I was talking about the new daily fantasy sports landscape. And then the whole week since, obviously, talking about Colin Kaepernick. And such a big issue that's become the polarizing debate in sports. And in news, it's leading CNN, this stuff. So we're going to talk about it. I think that's something that we can talk about and have a deep and honest conversation about such an important topic that has been raised through sports, through an act of before a football game, a preseason football game. So that's what we're going to get into. But, as I keep saying, we've got to get into our stuff, right? We've got to get into the basic historical black letter law of sports law. And there is kind of law of sports law. But as I keep talking about, it's going to tangentially impact all these other areas of law, such as labor, such as contracts, such as torts, such as immigration, and in this situation, constitutional law, right? Con law. Colin Kaepernick, stories about con law. And it's also about what we're going to talk about the next 3 weeks, which is commissioner power, moral integrity in sports. How do you discipline? What do you look at? What do you want your league to stand for? What do you want your team to stand for? What do you want your athletes to stand for? What do you want the public to look at you and say, what are they? I like them. I don't like them. I don't trust them. These are the deeper issues in sports. So again, this is sports law, but it's also sports sociology. It's also sports policy. And of course, it's sports business. So to me, the Kaepernick situation is just another example of an exploding story that emanates out of sports. Does this kind of stuff happen in other walks of life? Sure. Of course it does. Of course you have little acts of civil disobedience everywhere, every day. But if it happens in sports, and if it happens in a big sport like football, with a big name like Kaepernick, oh my God, you can't turn away. It's like an accident on the side of the road. We can't turn away from this stuff. Everyone's talking about Kaepernick, and everyone's got these hot takes. And now you get into these bigger issues, right? Of freedom of speech, of race, of police brutality, of constitutional freedom, of where are we living? What is going on? How much of this is patriotism? How much of this is military? How much of this is veterans? How much of this was an affront to the values of this country? Wow. So that's what's been going on. If you've been living under a rock, you probably haven't heard this. But if you haven't, you probably have. And it's been an interesting week. Personally, my week, I was in New York all weekend moving my son into NYU, which is very hard. And then I took my younger son. I was speaking at a conference in Milwaukee yesterday, so I surprised my younger son go back to see the Packers on Monday. And, he's a kid, like, he was a baby when we moved out of Green Bay, but he's quite a fan. And here's this kid, sitting, him and Aaron Rodgers for a half hour. Like, he's a kid. I'm like, you realize this doesn't happen, like, all the time. You don't sit with superstar quarterbacks and go out to lunch. So he was in heaven, obviously. Mason Crosby was our next door neighbor, the kicker. And of course, we spent a lot of time with him. But, and I talked to Aaron a lot about this stuff. And some of it I got on a podcast, which is out now. And it really just comes down to a personal feeling about the way athletes should handle themselves. What was really interesting to me to hear from Aaron Because when I knew Aaron, he was a backup. And he was this backup quarterback behind Brett that nobody knew. You know, he's just a guy walking around backup quarterback. Dating a girl that was a local Green Bay girl. I mean, he was just a guy in Green Bay. And now, of course, he's one of the biggest stars in the country. And what was interesting to him when he talked about when I asked him what he thought about Kaepernick, he really sort of talked about a historical lesson of Bill of Rights and a Constitution, and took sort of both ways about what it stands for, but also right to free speech. But what was interesting, I said, well, what about you? I mean, do you feel restricted? Do you feel like you can say things you want to say? Because he's a very honest guy. He's not a cliche guy like a lot of these athletes. And he said, I do, but I understand the magnitude of what my position is. He says, I understand I speak for a team. I speak for a league. I speak for a vast Packer nation out there of millions of people. And every time I say something, I realize that. I realize I speak for that. And I thought it was very interesting that he said that, because he is, again, not one of these prone to cliche guys who's very honest. And what he also said was, it's important to realize, I said, what has changed for you most since I knew you as a backup quarterback? He says, well, obviously the demands, media, the demands of fans, the demands of privacy. And he doesn't have a private life, obviously. It's very hard. But what was important to him is, and it's sort of a lesson for everyone, what he told me just sort of resonated. He said, I've just got to protect my time for what's important. You know, what I do is really trying to protect my time. I've got to have energy for what's important, which is leading the team as an athlete. So what he has transformed in his 11 years as a professional is into someone who is incredibly protective of his time, because time can be pulled a lot of different ways when you're a star. And he is the biggest proponent I've ever met now of nutrition and sports science. He's got all the metrics now. Hydration, sleep, the metrics on working out, when you're loading your body too much. Everything's vegan, everything's quinoa. You know, and Tom Brady's going through this too. It's just really these guys become at a certain age where they realize, okay, now it's all about longevity. You know, I've gotten by on great athletic skill. Now it's carrying that through. And this relates to my conversation with you guys last week about holding on, because at some point the elite level stops. And when you're coming down the mountain instead of going up, you want to have that reserve as much as you can. You really do. I think a lot of what you hear from me here is someone who was a very, very unsuccessful, failed athlete. And I get into these things hearing about athletes that didn't fail and what keeps them successful. And listening to Aaron, it was just so interesting. What keeps him successful is just this hyper-protective focus on, I've got to be ready for what's important. Okay, I'll do some media stuff, I'll do some fan stuff, but don't mess with my time to run this team. That's where he makes the difference in the world. I mean, that's where he makes the difference in sports. So I think that's probably anyone. I think the, Brady's and Peyton Manning's and the Cam Newtons all have to think that way. There are going to be so many demands on their time, they just have to focus on what's important without turning people off. Okay, and then just to finish my week, what I wanted to share with you now that I can, because I couldn't talk about this conference until it was over. Yesterday in Milwaukee had the annual gathering of a group you may have heard of called the FBI. And they had a panel about targeting athletes. and I was lucky enough to be asked to speak on that panel. And it was me, and it was a couple former athletes that would like to remain anonymous, who have been swindled. Some you wouldn't believe how well known they are, but I can't talk about who they were. And what I realized is athletes getting swindled is not something they want out there. It's a stigma. I got taken for $25 million. That's not something you want out there. So I went from Aaron Rodgers to some of people as well known as Aaron Rodgers that got swindled, and they were part of the panel. It was really interesting, the stigma that people feel about getting taken. And what I learned from these FBI people is that it's not just guys hanging around athletes or financial advisors that steal their money. This is the word they use over and over again. I never have thought about in this terms. Predators. There is a subculture of financial predators for athletes. Predators. And then you stop and think about all the people that hang around athletes and their friends and their hangers-on and their cousins and their uncles and their wives and girlfriends and wives and girlfriends. And you see all these people, and then you realize that the web can really grow fast. Because the friends and the hangers-on, they have friends. And the friends of the hangers-on, they have friends. And like, yeah, don't you know him? Yeah, my friend, they're boys, yeah. So somebody could infiltrate into that circle. And this is what I learned, and I spoke about my experiences where I've seen athletes get targeted. So there are predators out there. And these stories were just compelling. And it was me, it was a couple of these athletes, it was Michelle Roberts, who was the head of the NBA Players Association. And it was someone with Major League Baseball security. It was an incredibly insightful panel. I was happy to be on it, and I learned a lot. But the fact that there's this subculture of predators on athletes, I had no idea. And I would assume on entertainers and actors and musicians as well. Because the circle gets bigger. It just gets bigger. And once it gets bigger, there's more negative influences that can get in. You ever watch the NBA draft or the NFL draft? Guy gets picked, comes up and shakes the hand of the commissioner, holds the jersey, takes the hat on, and then they take a picture, right? The family takes a picture. Okay? The kid that I like is the one in the picture is the mom, the dad, the girlfriend. That's it. When you see those pictures with 40 people, that's when I worry. Because who are these 40 people? What are they going to want? The bigger the picture at the draft, the more I worry about their financial security. You don't want a big picture. You want 3 or 4 people in that picture. And when I was an agent, when you represent a player, you represent a herd. You take on all those people. Many clients I had, I never dealt with the player. I dealt with some brother, some cousin, some uncle, some advisor from growing up. It can be a problem. Okay. I digress, as I often do. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start getting into the material about some of the commissioner stuff. When we break, then we'll come back and talk a little bit about Kaepernick. Okay, we will talk about him. I have already 3 emails from you guys. Like, are you going to talk about that? I'm like, yeah, we'll talk about it. Because it is so polarizing. But I want you to think about it. I want you to think how it relates to what we're talking about. I want you to think about where is your view? And everything, like I said last class, everything we do, think about your either side, okay? Your management, in this case, management of 49ers, management of the NFL, any Colin Kaepernick's endorsers management, or your player, your advising Kaepernick, your agent, your business manager, whatever it is. What do you do? Okay, that is what a lawyer does. How do you advise? This is not in a book, right? I don't have it in a sports law textbook saying, here's what you do when you don't stand for the national anthem. There's no black letter law on that. Okay. Before we get started, we are in class 2. You heard from me last week. I heard from you. Anyone who wasn't here last week that can tell us who you are, where you're from, why you're in the class, what your interest in sports is. Yes, sir.
So my name is Emmett Jaguar. I'm a transfer student from Suffolk, Boston. I went to UConn undergrad. I was a basketball manager with the men's team for 2 years. So I guess that's the reason why I'm really interested in sports. What's the other questions?
Well, yeah, the class and...
Oh, why I'm taking this class? Oh, yeah, just to get experience and understanding about sports law, I guess.
Okay, welcome. Was there one other? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Megan Mills. I'm from Easton, Pennsylvania, and I went to Penn State undergrad. I'm really interested in intellectual property law, and I know that sports law and intellectual property law have a lot of overlap. So I just wanted to get more exposure to what sports law is.
Okay, great. Do we know our numbers? Do we know if anyone dropped? Okay. How do I get those screens up? Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Okay, so our first topic, we're going to start talking about this commissioner. I don't really have an explanation. I'll tell you right off why this is the name we've chosen to call leaders of sports. It could be prime minister, it could be president, it could be CEO, it could be czar. But for whatever reason in sports, these leaders are called commissioners. They become the guiding light, the face of the sport, and for our purposes, the face of the law for the sport. And certainly when you start thinking about especially the NFL over the recent years, Commissioner Goodell is the face and the law of the sport. It all intersects. When you start thinking about a role for someone like this, we want to talk about the authority and the powers and duties, but you sort of think if you're going to create a role, what is that role? This is what's being debated in discussions with lawyers, discussions with unions, discussion with league executives. What is that role? What kind of power? How broad? How comprehensive should that power be? What should be delegated? Okay, when you put together a league, when you have a leadership, what should be delegated? And how should that commissioner be chosen? How democratic should it be? The one thing, it started with Major League Baseball. We're going to look at the case involving that in a minute. But here's the key. The commissioner is not really, this is something we talk about a lot. Who does a commissioner work for? Anyone? Alex?
The owners.
The owners. So what does that mean? What do you think the commissioner's role is based on that fact?
Make them as much money as possible.
So you think it's more business, more financial?
Definitely more business.
Okay. Anyone else think that the commissioner has another role? Another primary role? Yes.
I think it's the hard letter version of it. It's protecting integrity of the teams and integrity of the league.
Okay, integrity. These are the watchwords of sports, right? Integrity is the big word. When you hear Commissioner Silver, Bettman, Goodell, it's all about integrity. And this sounds like a silly question, but why? Why is integrity so important?
They want to look good.
To
Make money.
look good to who?
Fans.
Fans and networks. Who else? Sponsors. Okay, when you have a sports league, what do you want people to do? To what in your league? Yeah. Invest. Okay, what are fans investing besides money? What are we all investing in sports? What are we investing when we turn on football for 4 hours on Sunday? What? Our time. Good God, we had so many options, right? That computer you're looking at, there's a lot of ways to spend time. When people invest their time in a sport, that is something that leagues have to respond to. And when you invest, you want integrity. You want to feel like, wow, I'm investing in something I can relate to. It's an integrity, it's a true product. Okay. But I think what I've become a bit jaded on the role of the commissioner, but I don't want necessarily you to be. Because when we talk about the commissioner, Alex just said, well, he works or she works for ownership. Okay, that statement in itself can be very pejorative. Like, okay, well, that's all about the money. It's all about making these owners money. But is it? Forget about your image of any certain commissioner in sports right now. What do you think the role of the commissioner should be besides making the owners a lot of money? Alex?
Growing the game.
Growing the game, how?
Whether it's expanding to new cities or low-income cities or even internationally, by just kind of getting it out there and getting more people.
Okay. Selling it to more? Always concerned about more fans, more investment in your product, more money by natural association. What else? Yeah. Okay. Kids. Get the younger generation involved, invested. What else, Sarah?
Protecting the integrity of the game, whether it be through players cheating or switching up rules so that it's safer to play, like with the concussions.
Right. Okay, so the image. You've got to make people feel they can invest not only money, not only time, but the product. You're selling a product. And Sarah brought up, obviously, the head injury issue in football. We'll spend a lot of time on that. We'll leave that for now. But this is all bubbling up in the same issue, which is this the right thing to invest in for our kids? Because ultimately it is about the next generation. But what constituency have we not talked about yet? We've talked about sponsors, owners, fans. What partner of the owners have we not talked about? The players, okay? The players are the most important partner of any sports league because they are what? I use this word a lot. They are the what? They're an asset. They're the product. Okay? When you're selling football or basketball or baseball or hockey, what are you selling? You're not selling owners. You're not selling sponsors. You're not selling arenas. You're not selling stadiums. You're not selling concessions. You're selling the players. They're the product. Okay, so when you turn on the TV, come watch Aaron Rodgers and the Packers play Cam Newton and the Panthers. That's what you're selling. You're not selling anything else but the players. And you don't turn on to watch the announcers. You don't turn on to watch the owners. You don't turn on to watch the general managers. You don't turn on to watch the marketing. You watch the players. So I think it's telling, even in this room, that one of the last people you bring up in talking about what a commissioner should be responsible for is the players. Because we have reached a point in sports law where there's friction. Didn't always happen this way. The ideal is a commissioner that works for, as was said, the good of the game, which includes players. Now, all these other things we talked about, but also players. We are now at a time in sports law history where we don't talk about it that way. Why? Because so much friction. Every sports league has gone through this in the past 5 years. Fights, labor, lockout, work stoppages, hate each other, can't agree on anything, suspensions. Okay? Many people would say the reason is because the heads of these unions and the heads of these leagues are what? Lawyers. So they fight a lot. But we are in a period of friction in sports law where unions, which are the players, and leagues, which are the owners, don't get along. It's that simple. And even in this discussion, when we talk about a commissioner, what is he or she responsible for? It is the good of the game in theory, it is the players in theory, but as Alex mentioned, it's really taking care of those who brought him or her there, which is ownership. And that usually means, like he said, money. And the more money for owners, the less money for players. That's where you get this friction. Okay, so it's a really interesting dichotomy when we get to the Bowie-Kuhn case we're going to talk about later today, because now, and this happens with the most obvious example for you Patriot fans, Robert Kraft. We have a commissioner who's disciplining an owner who pays and hires the commissioner. So the employee, in that sense, is disciplining his employer. Think about that. So when we talk about the Kuhn case today or the Kraft and Brady case down the road, that is someone who works for the Patriots disciplining the Patriots. That's why this is one of these examples that sports it's just different. I can't explain it, it's just different. People come from other walks of life, walks of business, walks of law. They just don't get it. I'm like, I can't explain it. It's just the way it is. It's sports. Like a commissioner disciplines owners. An employee disciplines employers. It happens. But he's paid to do that. So, that's the role we're looking at. We're going to talk a lot about powers, contracts. Every contract I did when I did contracts for the Packers, hundreds of contracts, was not official until approved by the commissioner. Now, it was just a rubber stamp, unless it was some wildly complicated contract like for Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, but every other one is just, there's never going to be a holdup. But theoretically, they approve every contract for players, every contract for a team with a sponsor, team with a concessionaire, team with a stadium, team with a city. Commissioner has all those powers because it's not technically official until the commissioner has approved it. The middle bullet point there is obviously the one we're going to spend most of the time on, dispute resolution. Everything about sports seems to revolve around commissioner power in disputes with players right now. Anywhere from some of these older cases to Ray Rice and Tom Brady. We'll talk about that as well. And then as a corollary to that, the power to investigate, the power to adjudicate, and the power to prosecute. Okay, this is not real world law, this is sports law, and this happens outside the purview of courts. And I'll say it for the first time this semester, you hear it all the time for those who follow football, the judge, the jury, and what? Executioner. So it's a role that Commissioner Goodell seems to have taken, and it's been a constant source of friction. As the general powers of the commissioner, as we'll see, they grow, they restrict, they grow, they restrict, and now we seem to be in a period where they are growing again. We're in a period of sports law where they seem to be growing again with unlimited powers now in all sports. Other duties, we see this phrase a lot. You know, someone said integrity of the game. It's really the same thing as best interest. These are the catchphrases in sports. What do they mean? It just depends on the day, right? Best interest of the league, best interest of the game, integrity of the game. These are the watchwords of sports. They want people to feel like it's a secure integrity product. Everything is good. And some of the other duties of a commissioner obviously are the officials, our league employees. PR is a huge factor in sports, getting the message out. Okay, the NFL just hired Joe Lockhart, the former White House press secretary, as their press secretary. You just see all the connections with government officials going into PR for sports leagues now. It's an interesting dichotomy there. Broadcasting and television, these are, of course, the biggest revenues of all sports. I don't know where sports would be without broadcast and television. They're the lifeblood of sports right now. And while everyone, especially your age, is cord cutting and cord shaving, it seems the one area that's immune from any broadcast deficiencies in terms of revenues is sports. It's actually getting more valuable, sports properties. And of course, we have ESPN, and now we have all the sub-networks trying to catch up to ESPN, CBS Sports, NBC Sports, Fox Sports. They're just trying to get more live events, what ESPN doesn't have. Property rights are going up. The more bidders you have, the more you're going to be able to charge. So while people are cutting the cord on cable, these sports properties are going up and up, and the rights fees are going crazy. Still. I'm asked all the time, when will the bubble burst? On NFL rights, on NBA rights, on baseball rights? I have no idea. I think it's still going north. Because you can't get live programming. You just can't. That people want to watch. Sports is the only thing. It's the only thing my kids watch on TV. The rest is on their computer. So, broadcast and television is just such a draw for sports live events. And then, of course, you know, when an ESPN gets an NFL like it does for the next 10 years, then they build it's called shoulder programming around it every day of the week. And it sells. Same with the NBA, same with baseball. And then, of course, we see all the sub-networks of the leagues have their own networks. And they're charging tremendous rights fees to the cable companies like Comcast and Time Warner. So again, when you hire a commissioner, one thing you do want is some broadcast experience in terms of dealing with networks, because that's your major revenue source. Your major revenue source. Okay. I'm going to do our first case, which is the Landis case. Who's talking about that? Tell me your name, I'm sorry. Billy, right. So Billy, just tell us, and this is for everyone, just sort of, you've done this in all your classes. I don't make it a hard-ass thing. Just the facts of the case, what went on, what are the issues, the rulings, and then we can all discuss it.
Right. So you had Fred Bennett, who was an infielder for the St. Louis Browns, who was kind of being shipped back and forth between the neighborhood team, the Browns, and the minor league team, which was in Milwaukee. Both teams had the same owner, and he had essentially what the owner done was create a farm system, an early version of the farm system. The player was really unhappy with this once the commissioner said this isn't right, and made him a free agent essentially.
Right.
The owner had an issue with that and said that the commissioner was going outside his powers, that his best interest power was only applied to what was enumerated in the Major League agreement itself.
So what do they say about commissioner power here?
So they basically said that the commissioner power is that he has all the power of the benevolent, all the display attributes of benevolent, but absolute despot, and all the display power is the proverbial outer humilius. So it basically said he had total power, and that if they read into it that he only had enough power to prevent things that were enumerated, at that point gives him the total power, and that if you read that like you construed that narrowly, he won't really have much power.
Correct. And what's the backstory here? And it's on this slide about how he came to power, how Landis was brought in.
It was after the Black Sox scandal.
Right. So what's at issue? When you have a Black Sox scandal, for people who don't know, 1920, I don't know how old everyone was back then. It's a joke. The White Sox threw the series. Shoeless Joe Jackson, right? Still not in the Hall of Fame because of that. Okay, that's what I know. They threw the World Series. So huge integrity issue. Baseball was the #1 sport by far in this country then. And then you have this mess of a Black Sox scandal through the World Series. Imagine that today, throwing a World Series or a Super Bowl or an NBA championship. A deliberate throwing of the series. So the scandal is in the news, and what does Major League Baseball do? As Billy says, they want to get the most impeccably credentialed leader to take baseball out of this huge scandal and right the ship. They get one of these big-time judges and a judge. I don't know what court, one of the big courts. And which one? Was it a circuit court? Or?
I'm not sure.
Okay. But basically, you can imagine baseball owners back then going to this Kennesaw Mountain Landis, this respected, impeccably credentialed judge, and saying, "Come be our commissioner." And he's like, "What? What's a commissioner? Come be our leader." Why? Your game's in shambles after this Black Sox thing. And what did they have to do? Like any negotiation, right? Landis had all the leverage. You talk about a negotiation with leverage. He said, "I'll be your commissioner, but I got to do anything I want," right? Basically, I want to run the game how I want. They gave Landis freedom, carte blanche. Figure it out. Restore the integrity of the game. And that quote that Billy read, if you read it again, something about an absolute despot, and a despot means a dictator.
Endowed the commissioner with all the attributes of benevolent and absolute despot.
Benevolent and what despot?
Absolute despot.
Absolute despot. It's quite a word, despot. I like it. Despot. I'm going to use that later tonight. I don't know how. But when I hear a word like that, I'm like, I like that. Despot. I met a guy once, by the way. He said he learned a word every day, and he would use it all day to incorporate in his vocabulary. And I understood it when, after being with him a couple hours, he said the word duplicitous like 7 times. Yeah, I'm practicing the word. That's my word today. I'm like, you do that every day? Yeah. I'm like, no, you don't. He said he did. I don't believe him. But despot means dictator. Okay, so Landis wanted the power, got the power, used the power. And again, for your purposes, Billy talked about some of these details with this owner that owned both teams and this and that. The real issue is here. The commissioner, it's not even the facts. The commissioner could do what he wanted to do. This is your first commissioner. Okay, no restrictions. See those words, carte blanche? You hear the word absolute despot? That's pretty broad. It's probably as broad as you get. So the start of the commissioner in sports becomes this judge who had free reign to do whatever he wanted. And you see some of the language here that Billy referenced. You have an agreement. The agreement brings in for the first time some of these phrases we're going to hear over and over again. Conduct detrimental to baseball, that's the key phrase. Conduct detrimental is a catchphrase we're going to see in every sport as a means to discipline. So remember those two words. It's a means to discipline, conduct detrimental. What does it mean? Under Roger Goodell, as you know, it means anything he wants it to mean. And to Judge Landis, it meant what he wanted it to mean. It doesn't matter what you or I think conduct detrimental is. It matters what the commissioner thinks conduct detrimental is. And we've seen different commissioners handle that phrase much more broadly. And then that last line, to take such other steps as he might deem necessary and proper in the interest and morale of the players and the game. Again, best interests. That's what this means. Okay, I'm making the point over and over again here. The powers are broad, the powers are undefined. It's the perfect storm for the powerful commissioner. Okay, you got the backstory of the Black Sox scandal. You have a judge who didn't really want the job. You have owners that want to change the image of the league coming off this incredible scandal. And you have a commissioner that says, I'll do it if, and only if, I get all the power. And he got the power. So whether it's Brandt, the guy, or the Milwaukee Association, they had no shot here, right? They had no chance in this case. But we have our first major case involving commissioner power, and it goes the way of a completely unfettered power to do what he or she thought in the best interest of the game, conduct detrimental, all those phrases, all applied here. Anything else, Billy?
Public policy concern raised too, where I guess all said, like, kind of forewarning, like, you can't give someone some power or do that, just like, thing to be precedent, and the court basically said, you submitted to them, so.
Right.
That's your problem.
Again, we see history repeating itself over and over again. Think about this case. What is this, 1920 something? 1930. Okay? We're seeing the same exact arguments. Right? With the NFL, with the NBA, with Goodell, with Silver. What is the power? And just as Milwaukee Association argued, the NBA players are arguing, the NFL players are arguing, you have too much power. You can't do this to us. It's the exact same thing. So 1930, 2016, we're seeing the same arguments over and over. And back then, we'll see a little change of shape in the next 70 years, but back then and maybe even now, this power seems to be confirmed by the courts because of the giving of it. Now back then, We didn't have CBAs, okay? And for those of you who missed it last week, I'm going to say that word a lot. It means collective bargaining agreement. Back then, we didn't have that. Now we do. But what it really has, it's codifying and memorializing and documenting exactly what was going on way back with Landis. Powers of the commissioner. And now instead of this sort of major league agreement that the owners say, you got all this power, players can't do anything about it, now players can do something about it. Through collective bargaining, through labor negotiations, through individual negotiations. The point of recent history in sports law, though, the players have not done something about it, which means is a major contention in a lot of discussion. Okay, any questions about the Landis case? Who knows what commissioner power would be like if there was no White Sox, Black Sox scandal? It's an interesting discussion, because then they wouldn't have been leveraged to give a commissioner so much power. So we think about all the events that lead to where we are today. If a commissioner was only supposed to negotiate a TV deal or only supposed to negotiate a stadium deal and not get involved with players and not get involved with owners. That could have happened back in 1930. And if it did, sports would look a lot different today. Suspensions, fines, much different. Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back and get into a couple other cases and talk about American anthem. For anyone who has been, like I said, when I started living under a rock past week, someone volunteered to say what's been going on with this national anthem and Colin Kaepernick. Anyone give us the facts? You've been all under a rock? Cody?
So during the preseason game last week, 49ers, Packers during the national anthem, Colin Kaepernick, who's I guess backup quarterback maybe for the 49ers now, position is in flux, decided to sit down during the anthem while everyone else was standing. And when he was asked about it in an interview, he said he was essentially protesting racial disparity in the United States and a lot of stuff that has been going on in the last year with police officer brutality and those types of things. And that he said he was going to continue to sit during the anthem until there's change in the United States.
What was your first reaction?
My first reaction, I guess, initially was that that's kind of an interesting way, I guess, of bringing attention to that. You always think of being respectful to, like, the troops is the connotation that's always usually associated with the national anthem, although in reading this stuff the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of veterans that have spoken out and said that that isn't a proper association, that just because it's a patriotic act doesn't necessarily mean you're disrespecting the troops. And there's been a lot of divide. A lot of people, veterans, and people of all races have spoken out in support of Colin Kaepernick and then against him.
Anyone here with military background? Or law enforcement? Okay, what are some other opinions before I give you mine? This obviously has been a polarizing topic throughout the week. Alex?
Kind of talking about like how the Eagles rookie said he was going to do it, and his agents advised him not to, just going back to the whole protecting the image of the league and not trying to stir anything up, I think was really interesting.
Yeah, one of my initial thoughts is for taking it outside of the Kaepernick situation is would others follow? And there was an Eagles player, backup player, saying he was going to, and then he had a change of heart. Somebody got to him. And obviously his spot on the roster is not secure, and maybe that was part of it. he changed his mind. But we'll see if there are others that follow this week, maybe tonight, tomorrow night, maybe during the season. Other thoughts about it? Yeah, Jason.
I guess I found it interesting, so the ESPYs, like LeBron and Carmelo, CP and Dwayne Wade, basically spoke on kind of the same issues, and they kind of got an overwhelming wave of support for what they did, and they kind of followed the town hall in LA, I think. And so with that group and then Kaepernick, we're kind of getting at the same types of issues, but it was the way in which they did it had an effect on how people interpreted it. I thought that was interesting to kind of see different reactions to somewhat similar ideas.
One thing that I thought was really interesting, and I think Pat Forty from Yahoo was one of the people that was discussing it, but how this would affect in amateur athletics, specifically, so Missouri's football team took a stance last year, and doing it from a united front created change, at least on that campus. The president and the head coach, maybe for different reasons, but all this leadership was changed, at least as somewhat of a result of that, but they were acting uniformly, and there was a question of if one college player acted alone in this instance, what the reaction would be from them. Would they be ostracized by the professional leagues when they came to that? Would they have scholarship ramification, all those types of things that Colin Kaepernick's kind of protected by his paycheck and his spotlight as at one point a superstar player, and that wouldn't necessarily translate down.
Reactions to Kaepernick in terms of respect for him, less, more? What were some other reactions to what he did?
I thought he was going to get cut. I was just like, this is the final straw, just like, if some of these distractions, he's a distraction now. So originally when I first saw it, I was like, God, this guy's always in the news doing something that is against the public opinion and all this stuff, and obviously the NFL, like, and they had down protection, so I thought that he might get cut.
And he might.
Yeah.
Now the question is the latter part of what you said, because of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there seems to be a spin coming out of San Francisco that, as Cody said, he's a backup and not doing well, which would take it out of the, for other reasons, they're releasing him discussion. I almost see it as a preemptive strike by the 49ers, leaking it out to media people saying, you know he stinks now, so that they're not accused of any kind of retaliatory action for a political statement. I mean, one thing, I'm asking about what he did, and also for those of you, I think most of you probably saw his comments after, which were very raw. Open, honest, emotional, and probably controversial. Yeah.
I think not even necessarily why he was doing it, but I think people in this country feel so passionately about the national anthem and what it stands for. So even regardless of what his thoughts behind it are, some people see it as disrespectful. I mean, you look at the Olympics and that wasn't even put her hand on her heart. Like, it's not law to put your hand on your heart. It's not law to stand there and the national anthem. But I think that there's a sense of respect that people have for the anthem that it stands for. So I think people are probably more upset about that than any comments or why he was doing it. I think that probably struck the chord with people first.
Yeah, there's this, as Pat and I were talking, I mean, if you're in the stands, I mean, you could be getting a hot dog, you could be sitting, you could be talking to your friend. No one's going to say anything, right?
And then like along the same lines, that pole vaulter who I think was a veteran who stopped during his run when he heard the anthem song.
Yeah.
So people see that and that's put up on such a pedestal.
Yeah, you see the other side, Usain Bolt stopping an interview to listen to the anthem. And people love that, right? that sort of gets popularity going. Terrence.
That discussion of at one point the national anthem or the idea of patriotism in sports become such a big deal on some of us would kind of thinking pre-9/11 would this have been as big an issue?
Right.
Now people get as patriotic as they have been, and just that was kind of my reaction to it because for those of us that played sports, it was just something you did. It didn't necessarily do it because you felt patriotic or students in school that were allowed to play music, do it because they're told to do it. Try to learn the words of the song, don't know the history behind it. So I guess hearing some of the different responses from different players, like particularly these kind of surprised me.
Yeah.
Because of how passionate he was and how disrespectful people were because he has an affiliation with military vets. But that's not necessarily what the song necessarily what the idea behind the flag itself stands for. So it sounds like a lot of
This has really become a Kaepernick versus the military thing, which I don't think he wanted it to be, and I don't think he meant it to be. It's hard to know exactly what is in his heart when he's doing this, but he didn't back down. And he's going to do it again tomorrow in San Diego, which is the home of all the military. And they're having Fleet Week or something. So it's going to be quite an issue down there. It's interesting, Terrence, because you mentioned Breeze. There hasn't been a lot of players on either side, right? Speaking out on this. This is what you talked about in terms of fear of getting cut or fear of stepping out or fear of stepping out of that box because of maybe commissioner power, because not having the power to do it, not feeling you have the power to do it. But it's one thing for Kaepernick. We don't even see players responding. Like, good or bad. Now you have media members going crazy on both sides. You have analysts, you have commentators, and not just sports, CNN and MSNBC and everything. But that's what they do. And then you get into some tough racial issues and people saying he's not really black. I mean, then you have polarizing issues beyond that, right? But what's interesting to me is you really have very little commentary from players, from his side. Not saying they don't agree with him or not saying they agree with him. They're just, it seems to me, scared to take any side. So he's out there kind of alone. Yeah.
I think another interesting aspect is what does Chip Kelly and the Niners management do based on Chip Kelly's past with the Riley Cooper situation, and whether that plays into them trying to save face by not cutting him because of Chip Kelly's past, and then even more so going further, will Colin Kaepernick do this on 9/11 when the season kicks off?
So on the discipline issue, two things. The league, we all criticize the league a lot for their being overreaching and heavy-handed with their power. That's what we're going to talk about. But I give them kudos on this because they made a brief statement on Twitter, and that was it. And the statement said, players are encouraged but not required to stand during the national anthem. They cut it off. They said something succinct, terse, exactly what they needed to say. No discipline, and the right message. You still have the freedom to not, but they're encouraged too. So again, I think you got to give credit where credit's due. The NFL message was one sentence, we're moving on. No discipline. But the no discipline part is what I wonder, now do we have more sitters? Because now it's out there, right? Precedent, lawyer. No discipline. Encouraged, but not required. So when you're encouraged and not required, you know you're not going to get disciplined because you're not required. So I'm going to be very interested if there are more. Now this Eagles guy, he got talked off. Thought it would be not a good thing for his career. But once the season starts, players feeling a little more secure. Even on 9/11, I think we will have more sitters. And then Colin Kaepernick will become somewhat of an icon. I just think this thing could really grow. Because there's got to be people with latent feelings like Kaepernick had. And I'm not just talking about football. As you know, every sport does this. But not in other countries, right? It just seems to be this country, we play the anthem. It's something we do. And then the Chip Kelly, the team discipline. No discipline. Because we just found out about this week. He's been doing it. The first 2 games. No one seemed to notice. I think he wasn't dressed. I think he was injured and in street clothes or sweatsuit. But no one noticed. So they obviously, again, we'll get back to precedent. They can't discipline him now if they didn't do it the first 2 games. Because if they did, we'd have lawyers, and lawyers would say, well, here he is, game 1 and 2. You didn't do anything then. Now, the bigger issue is the job status. And like I said, if they do release him, and the cut down date is this weekend, if they do, we're going to hear a lot of, he just wasn't good enough on the field, has nothing to do with off the field. Because they have to say that. Their liability, once they decided they weren't going to discipline before, their liability is strong right now if they were to release him for any kind of association with a political statement. So expect, if he's released, we're going to hear a lot of, he stunk, right? He's not a good player anymore. And if he's not released, he's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the NFL is pretty calculated with not disciplining him, because even if it does set a precedent, more players do it. I feel like they realize that it's a pretty small number of players who are on the fence who would consider doing anything like that. And overwhelmingly, most players wouldn't. And at the end of the day, it is still upholding an American value of freedom of speech. So I think they took a pretty safe stance on it. If more players are going to sit because of this, let them sit, and the story will go from there. But the NFL doesn't look like it's being iron-fisted, which is how it's been portrayed recently in media a lot.
Great point, because that's exactly what I want you guys to think. How are you advising the commissioner that day? Okay, Friday night you get this report. What do? Firestorm Saturday morning. Firestorm. Which even get hotter when Cap spoke to the press. So what's your name?
Ray.
So Ray is advising the commissioner what he said. We can't. We got freedom of speech issues. This is going to be bigger than we've ever, this is going to be bigger than football if we discipline here. Anyone, and I want to hear from someone that would say to the commissioner, we have to discipline here. I don't mean, it doesn't have to be suspension. Fine. Who would discipline? Yeah.
I wouldn't discipline personally, but I guess if you want to advise him on it, you can kind of say that if you don't discipline him and more players begin to do it, then you start having a divide in the league between players who do it and players who don't do it, and that itself causes internal tension in between the league, which then is bad for teams, which is then bad for owners, which is then bad for you.
Right. So you're looking at the other side of precedent. You don't discipline, you worry about this swell of as I called them, latent feelings about whatever, police brutality, racism, whatever's going on, could become a factor. If you're advising the commissioner, you have to say, well, we could be sitting here in October and half the team could be sitting down on a certain team. How are we going to deal with that? Think about that. And the way to deal with it is to discipline right away. Because then if you don't, you got discipline because you see half the team, you got some discipline out there, and they're like, wait a minute, what about Kaepernick? Encouraged but not required. So that Twitter statement, which I am commending the NFL for, that is now the law. That's the sports law about anthems. We didn't know it. They decided on Friday night or Saturday, this is our law. And I commend them because it's not too harsh, it's not too soft, freedom of speech, but encouraged is a good enough word. But slippery slope, if there's more, and I predict there will be more. I don't know how we can say of 22,000 players, we're not going to have more. I think Kaepernick has ignited something in a small number of players. And I don't see that being the end of it. Yeah.
Question. So protests like that would fall under the NRA. Do you think this is something that maybe they don't step in now in discipline because the owner is able to change the collective bargaining agreement? Because it's supposed to be up next year.
Well, it's not up for a few years. Few years. But you bring up the labor issue. That's the other thing. Where was the NFLPA on this? The players' union. And I think DeMaurice Smith, the head of the union, made a comment about, we stand with Colin, or something like that. But again, talk about a spark. If they did discipline, union grievance maybe, then you have a whole nother lawsuit. Again, the union picks and chooses where it gets involved. It probably wouldn't do what it's done for Tom Brady with an average player. But Kaepernick, this is the first case. This is a big name player. This would be something we would see a labor action. But as you do in any course you take in law school, you have to look at, it's never about that case, right? Never about that specific case. It's about the bigger picture. Okay? When I did contracts for the Packers, I never worried about that specific contract. What I worried about was all the ones after it. Because if I gave in to a player to get this kind of language, or this little bonus here, or this little clause in his contract, because he's a nice guy, because I like the agent, because the player's my neighbor, because our wives are friends, whatever, it would be disaster for me, because I'd have a line at the door. I want what he got. Why can't I get it? So everything with, this is my difference between when I was on the player side, I didn't care. Player side, you don't care. You're all about your guy. You don't care that there's precedents, policies. You don't care. You want to get the best deal for your client. On the team or the league side, it is entirely about precedent. And those of you who followed Joey Bosa and the Chargers, everyone says, Chargers, just get him in. No. From a team point of view, you're not breaking precedent. Because there's going to be 100 Joey Bosas after him. And you don't want them saying, hey, look what you did for him. It's hard. Because the public usually sides with the players and says, why won't they do that? Well, they won't do it because the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. And this is exactly what's going on with Kaepernick. They had to make a decision very quickly on Saturday morning that said, this is where we're going to be. And after that, we'll see what happens. But that was the best course for that moment. It's going to come up again. I think we're naive to think Colin Kaepernick is A, not going to do this again, which we know he is, but B, there aren't going to be others who follow. The Eagles player mentioned it, there's going to be others. Why? Because we're in a political state right now which has some turbulence. It's been a turbulent summer. I don't have to tell you that. And the election is stirring everything up again. And this is where sports intersects with politics, sports intersects with policy. Again, if anything you take out of this class, it's that sports is bleeding over to so many other areas besides sports. This is one. And the Twitter world, the social media world has been going crazy with this. Now we have a Twitter handle, if you've seen it, not a handle, what's it called? A hashtag. Veterans for Kaepernick. So the immediate reaction was all the veterans bashing Kaepernick, but now we have veterans for Kaepernick. I'm not exactly sure what their rallying cry is. But it's created quite a storm. Okay, I asked, and it was a good answer. I asked anyone would discipline him. Anyone from the team side. From the team side, would you discipline Kaepernick? 49ers. Or let it go? We talked about league. What about team?
I don't think I would personally, but what Chase was saying, if you were going to, I think the move would be to discipline him and say he's causing divide. Like he's causing a divide in the locker room. Like there's a workplace disturbance, or other players in the team are having an issue with it. It would be like your best route to go if you did want to discipline him for it in some way.
Would you? If you're the general counsel of the 49ers, would you?
No.
You wouldn't?
Especially since they didn't do it after the first two, where it wasn't on national TV. I think it would look pretty bad for 49ers if it'd be one of those, like, kind of the way the Ray Rice thing happened, where everyone saw the second video and it was like, how could you do this? Like if you knew about it the first two times and didn't do anything,
right?
And then all of a sudden the video comes out of it, or the public blows it up, and then all of a sudden you're offended. I think it would look pretty bad for 49ers.
Okay, and what do they, same discussion, what do they risk not doing anything?
Internal turmoil in the locker room.
Yeah. What if he's got 20 friends that want to do the same thing next game? Yeah.
I'd say also that freedom of speech is here protected, right? In this circumstance, I wouldn't punish him from a team perspective. What if it was some player coming out making, hateful, racist, incendiary remarks, and then they say, "Hey, that's my freedom of speech." I should have repercussions. You're still working for somebody. See, if you don't want any repercussions, then you're in an employee-employer relationship. If it's your own business, then yeah, no one's going to punish you because it's your thing. But when you're working for somebody, there's still certain modes of behavior you have to abide by.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the con law argument here, it's a good one, but it's this, like you said, it's a private company. And as big and bold as the NFL is, it is private. It's not the government, although some people think it is a lot. It's not the government. 49ers is not the government. They make their rules. Could they have disciplined him? Yeah, they could have. What would be the line item for discipline? Those two words that they're catch-all for every team. Conduct detrimental. They just throw out conduct detrimental. It's in this club discipline language for every team. Conduct detrimental. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. So they could. So now they haven't. But you wonder privately with the agent maybe, with the lawyer, have they said something about if he does it again? It's going to be really interesting tomorrow night. Yeah.
I just think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the stands, because obviously some fans are going to sit with him. I think that's pretty inevitable. So how people around them react, if it could even cause a fight if you get someone that's really on one side of it, one side that's really on the other. Or even cross sport, if a baseball player sat on the foul line or a hockey player sat on the ice, like what's that going to do?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't really know how they would discipline him. And what are you going to do? Create a policy that says everyone has to stand and hand on their heart. Someone might not be an American citizen, baseball discipline. You have to face the flag of what degree and what angle and God
Yeah.
would be like smile. I don't really see how it's possible to enforce a policy like that, but you would understand that some people still keep their hat on with the national anthem. Well, there's nothing like to say that you can't do that, but if there's an unspoken rule, so when you start disciplining fans for that, I think it's just like a really slippery slope of how you actually
Definitely.
create that policy.
I mean, then you start to think about some creative ways. Do you have him stay in the locker room and come out after? Would he want to do that? I mean, these are tough things to navigate. Because, as I say, we're in this political state right now, which is turbulent. And I think Terrence brought up 9/11 with the patriotism. I just think that these waves come and go. You know, when we were, you know, when you get ready for the draft and you sit in that room for months, you call it the war room. You probably heard that, war room. But after 9/11, we were advised we don't call that room the war room anymore. But now everyone calls it the war room again. So these sort of waves of patriotism and non-patriotism. And think about if he did that way back, you know, when Whitney Houston was singing that song. Then you have a real firestorm. But anyway, I bring it up because, as I keep saying, a lot of intersections, getting you to think in a way that, how am I advising the 49ers? How am I advising Kaepernick? How am I advising the league? What is the right way to handle this? Do we come out of this with a compromise where he stays in the locker room? Would he accept that? Would the 49ers accept that? Would the league accept that? Would that create policy problems down the road? Okay? Is there another accommodation? We can be creative. We can think of something where it doesn't focus all the attention on them. These are sticky issues. And again, sports resonating beyond sports. That's where we are. I would estimate we're going to have one of these almost every week. It's just the way it happens. Okay, any other comments? If you're advising Kaepernick and you're cut tomorrow or Saturday, you file a grievance? Now his salary is guaranteed, but what if it wasn't? It's $12 million. And then the guarantee, I bring that up too. Would he have done this if he wasn't guaranteed? But Jason made a good point. Carmelo and LeBron and them stood up there, got universal praise, right? Stood up at the ESPY Awards, said some things, got universal praise. Kaepernick is less likable, less popular, and didn't do it at the ESPYs, and gets a lot of negative association. Something's wrong there. He didn't do anything a lot different than what those guys did. Yeah.
Based on what we've been talking about, one of the major differences is he didn't start with the product. They didn't. If they had done it during the NBA game, we probably have a different conversation. LeBron decided to make a speech during Game 7 of the NBA Finals. A different reaction of doing it and waiting until preseason of the NBA season, in my opinion. I don't think LeBron is more likely than Colin Kaepernick.
Oh, I think he's very likable. I would think most people think he's likable. He's just...
Maybe that's that wave you were talking about.
Yeah.
4 years ago. He was the same, so he kept doing that.
Yeah. But again, it comes off, you know, a month ago, we're all praising, as we should, Muhammad Ali upon his death. And they played, I mean, as you guys watched, they played some clips. That was really raw. You know, back 30 years ago saying, I'm not, you know, the Vietnamese, they're not my oppressor, the white man's my oppressor. I mean, saying all this stuff. And we praise that so much, his outspokenness. Colin Kaepernick didn't do anything near what Muhammad Ali was saying. It's interesting. And listen, I don't know Colin Kaepernick. I was impressed by the raw nature of his comments and the honesty. I think he spoke pretty eloquently. But like we sometimes we just ignore the obvious, which you mentioned, likability. Right? Likability is so important in how we perceive stances. We like those guys at the ESPYs. We don't necessarily like Kaepernick. And that really sort of clouds the messages. Do we like the guy? Yeah, okay. I think about steroids. You know, we have this negativity about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens because we don't really like them. They're kind of jerks, right? They're kind of dicks, sorry. They're just kind of bad guys. But then you have other players that are always associated with steroids, and yeah, we like them. What's the guy? Andy Pettitte. Nice guy. It's okay. It's okay, he's a nice guy. In Boston, with the fat guy with the teeth, Pappy. Yeah. Right? He's been linked to steroids with like all these guys. But he's Pappy. You know, he's fat, happy Pappy. We like him, right? So we like him, like, oh, the steroids, we don't really get involved with that with Pappy. Right? He's likable. Alex Rodriguez, steroids, oh man, what an a-hole. Right? We don't like him. Barry Bonds, we don't like him. But Pappy, yeah, Pappy can do no wrong. Right? We got Boston fans here? Pappy. He's Pappy, right? He's so fun and happy and yeah. Right? So again, likability is such a factor in all the things we're going to talk about. Should it be? From a legal point of view, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We shouldn't treat Pappy any differently than these other guys. But this is more kind of sports marketing and sports Q ratings and likability. It does factor in. Absolutely factors in. Okay, today, you heard about this Al Jazeera report and steroid rumors and Clay Matthews, and these guys finally got cleared today, but it took forever because there was kind of a stain on them for a long time. Well, Peyton Manning, he got cleared a long time ago because, hey, Peyton Manning, come on. How dare we suggest anything like that? He's Peyton Manning. But these guys, they're not Peyton Manning. They were put through this whole investigation on a much larger scale than it seemed that Peyton Manning was. So likability is a factor. Legally it shouldn't be. Theoretically it shouldn't be. Practically it is. And that's just something I note because I think it's applicable with Kaepernick. For whatever reason, he's not likable. I think he was likable when he was really good, right? We like the guy. He runs fast. He's a cool player. He's kissing his bicep, right? Remember that, Kaepernick? But he hasn't been good lately, so we don't like him as much. So again, these are way beyond legalities. This is just kind of a universal reactions to people, but they influence legal reactions. Okay, so we're going to watch this. We're going to watch it tomorrow night. I mean, listen, I mentioned this. San Diego, the home of this huge naval base, and they're having this week, whatever it's called, this military week. Hundreds of thousands of military. In the middle of all this, they're playing the 49ers in a meaningless game with Kaepernick. So it's going to be interesting. And the poor guy, I mean, there's going to be 1,000 cameras on him. He says he's going to sit down. And I assume he will. And that's all everyone will talk about. But good discussion. I agree with everyone. We should not, I just think disciplining here would be such a slippery slope, but realize that not disciplining is also a slippery slope, because there will be others. Any other comments? Okay. Speaking of, when we talk about commissioner power and integrity, there's one issue that really sort of gets to the heart of all of it, and it's an issue that is very, very much in the news now. Something Pat has done a lot of work on, which is gambling, sports and gambling. There seems to be this feeling, and I mentioned, likability. Gambling is something that strikes at the heart of integrity. Sports commissioners can allow a lot of things, but they don't allow for gambling, because gambling is that integrity issue, as I keep saying. It's the integrity of the game is at stake. So the seminal case in this area involved the hit king, okay, the hit king of all of baseball, Pete Rose. I mean, Pete Rose was before your time, he was really before my time, but we know the stories. Charlie Hustle. And when I say the hit king, yes, the most hits in the history of baseball. Imagine that. But here we sit in 2016, and we have Pete Rose banned from the sport since 1989 because of gambling. Think about that. Think about all the derelicts in the Hall of Fame or in sports, all the domestic abusers, everything. But it's Pete Rose gambling on sports has him out of the game. Through however many commissioners, including the current one. No one's letting him in. Okay, so this case is Rose versus Giamatti, the commissioner at the time, Bart Giamatti. And who's talking about it? Al?
Yeah, so basically, like you had said, Pete Rose was employed by the Cincinnati Reds as their manager at this time. There were allegations that he had been on baseball, and Bart Giamatti, who was the commissioner at the time, scheduled a disciplinary hearing. Pete Rose didn't think that he had the power to do that, so he filed an action in the Common Pleas of Hamilton County, which is Cincinnati. He was basically like a legend there. So basically what he had sought was a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction preventing the disciplinary hearing from happening. But because he was basically a legend in that area, Giamatti kind of filed a notice of removal to the federal court to try to get it kicked out on a basis of diversity of jurisdiction. Rose filed a remand to put the case back into Common Pleas. And he had argued that he basically in this suit, he sued Giamatti, the Reds, and Major League Baseball. And he was arguing that because they're all citizens, that they should be able to be in Ohio and that there was no diversity jurisdiction. So the courts analyzed it, going through basically who the parties were of this case. And first they went through the Reds and see if the Reds were a party in the case. Rose would argue that there was in the employment contract with the Reds that they were supposed to look out for him basically, and that they needed to check and see whether Giamatti has the power to do these disciplinary hearings. And when the court was going through, they saw in the contract that there's no rule that governs disciplinary hearings by the commissioner in that contract, in the employment contract itself. So the Reds have no jurisdiction, they're not party to the case basically, which kind of showed there that commissioner is vested with broad authority to establish his own rules and procedures, and the Reds have no influence as to how and when he can conduct these disciplinary hearings. And then after going on with that, they said that the commissioner is independent from Major League Baseball, so that the Major League Baseball is not a party to the case either. It's basically just between Rose and Giamatti, so there was never some jurisdiction in federal court instead of state court.
Okay.
But that basically is just that the commissioner has broad powers and that it's not within a contract with the team that protects the coach from disciplinary hearings with the commissioner. The commissioner has the right to, do whatever he sees fit in disciplinary hearings and make sure that the integrity of the game is upheld.
Okay, great. So what Rose was trying to do is, Alan, right?
Yeah.
As Alan was saying, what Rose was trying to do was take this out, kind of what Tom Brady did, right? Take this out of the arbitration system within the sport, because he knew Giamatti, he had no chance. Integrity, gambling, commissioner power. And move it to a court where, in, of course, Cincinnati, where he is the hit king, most popular, judges asking for autographs, all that stuff. Okay, obvious legal strategy. Take it away from the commissioner power, take it to court. And the court, just like we're going to see with Tom Brady recently, said, no, 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 no. Don't come to us. This is commissioner. It's not us. Don't come to a judge in Cincinnati, Ohio, and say, get me out from under the commissioner. It's not happening. Okay, history, Pete Rose, gambler. They hired this John Dowd, D-O-W-D, the commissioner did, to a Washington, D.C. lawyer. Okay, think modern times like a Ted Wells. They hired an investigator to dig up all the dirt they could on Pete Rose, and this multi-hundreds of pages report says, yes, Pete Rose did all this. From the clubhouse, placing bets on games. Now, there's disputes, and again, it's been clouded ever since, whether he actually bet on his own team. But the report said, obviously he bet on college football, he bet on NFL, he bet on horses, and he bet on baseball. He bet on baseball. Okay? So think about all these issues involved here. First of all, answer this question. If Rose only bet on other sports besides baseball, is that a problem? What do you do with that? Discipline or no discipline? Yeah.
I'd say no discipline. Like, I think if you thought about it today, like telling guys they couldn't do like a fantasy football league or like a March Madness bracket would be kind of insane, and you would definitely question why a baseball player or a baseball coach couldn't do something like that.
Okay, and yeah, this March Madness has come up a lot of times, and I think, what was the guy, Rick Neuheisel, I think, was even fired for doing a big March Madness pool. But let's put that aside, and I'll put that aside and say, okay, put March Madness aside. What if he's calling bookmakers about college football and NFL games? Is that different?
I think you definitely worry about like the legality of what's going on with it. Like, obviously, unless you're like in Nevada or somewhere where sports gambling is like authorized, I think whenever someone's doing illegal activity, there's a question there. But I also think it's kind of a bad look to be like gambling on someone in your position in a different sport.
Yeah.
But I still wouldn't have a huge problem with it as long as they're doing it like legally in Las Vegas.
Anyone else? See an integrity issue there? Okay, how about this question? Pete Rose, and this is what was alleged by him, he was betting on Reds games, but only betting on the Reds. I mean, never obviously betting against himself, his team. Problem there? He's only betting on his team. Tell me your name.
Garrett.
Garrett.
Yeah, so say if they play, if he had a bet, for instance, the next day, you know, he may not use a certain reliever in the game before, may change his strategy around to make sure that they were at full strength that next game. So it kind of brings those kind of situational decisions into play.
Anyone? Go ahead, Cody.
I was just going to say, I think what the rule is, and it's posted in every Major League clubhouse, is you can't bet on baseball. And sure, you can make the argument that it's more, there's more integrity to it because it's just his competitiveness. He always thinks he's going to win, and so he's capitalizing on that. But still, he's breaching the heart of that rule, and either way, it's illegal and it's against the game.
You can't allow that. I mean, obviously, you can make an argument if you're Rose's lawyer, of course. Like, yeah, he's all in, right? He's putting his skin in the game on every game. But you can't allow that. Think about, again, we'll talk about these words a lot, slippery slope. If you allow a coach to gamble on his team every game, what if is he gambling the exact same amount? Is he gambling different? I mean, it turned out that Rose wasn't betting on his team every game. And then you have a whole host of concerns. Why not that game? What's going on with that? And then, of course, the organized crime and the big gambling syndicates, and what are they doing with this information? I mean, it's way bigger than Pete Rose. Yeah.
I have a question for you. It's related to this, but it's taking a little different. Before the NFL season, Antonio Brown and Brandon Marshall made a very public wager against each other for who would have the most receiving yards. And I don't know how the rules are specifically in the NFL, but to me, that is they made a bet on themselves, and they made a bet on football, a very public one for $100,000 cars. There was no that was spun in a very positive light by media of like, these guys have this like fun bet going on, but it's a six-figure bet. And assuming there is seriousness behind it and someone will be a winner, do you think there's any?
Well, when I see things like that, yeah, my antenna go way up, because we don't know, what went on with league security and with the league and with the investigators and whether that was shut down quietly, although nothing seems to be quiet about the NFL. Yeah, my antenna went up when I saw a big bet like that, because it's gambling. Listen, this is an area that obviously is changing. We're going to talk about daily fantasy. It is completely different than it was, but the leagues have to protect this. I'll tell you a story that Cody triggered with what I dealt with in Green Bay in terms of this gambling issue. I'm getting ready for a game on a Sunday morning to go over to Lambeau Field, and I look at the ESPN pregame, and the guy's standing in front of our field and saying, I just get sick talking about this. He's saying, well, I just talked to some Green Bay defenders, and they're going to buy their linemen, some gifts if they hold Adrian Peterson under like 100 yards. And I'm getting ready for the game, and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. I don't like hearing that. That could be a problem. Because I knew this integrity issue in gambling could be an issue. And Adrian Peterson was a rookie who had just gained like 1,000 yards in a game the week before, and everyone's talking about him. It's like, wow, look at this guy. And he's coming into Lambeau Field, and now our guys are betting amongst themselves they're going to hold him under 100 yards. I get to the stadium, and I've got a message from NFL security. We got a problem. So I go into an office. I say, what's going on? They said, we saw the report on ESPN. Your guys are buying gifts about targeting a player. I said, whoa, targeting? Yeah, you're targeting Adrian Peterson to keep him under 100 yards? I said, I don't know anything about you. They can't do that. This is a problem. So I watched this game like knowing we're in trouble. And then, I don't know if anyone remembers this, like 2008, we break his leg. He breaks his freaking leg. We didn't try to break his leg. He broke his leg in that game. And you can imagine what I'm thinking now. Like, we're going to lose draft picks. We're going to be kicked out of the NFL. Like, oh my God, we just broke his leg and they're already watching us for targeting him. If this was before the bounty case, we had our own. So we get in Monday morning, I got a conference call with the commissioner. It wasn't him, but it was his people. He's like, why were you putting a bounty on Adrian Peterson? Like, what? You guys put a bounty on him. What? Yeah. What's the problem? What's going on there? I said, no. We have some guys talking about gifts. What kind of gifts? I'll find out. So we bring the defense in, and we say, what's going on? And the guys say, well, yeah, we're going to give some DVDs. We'll give some CDs, DVDs, some videos. If these guys held Adrian Peterson under 100 yards. I said, that's all? Video? Yeah, videos. Best Buy. We give them some Best Buy videos. So I called back the league. I said, it's Best Buy videos. And so that's not right. I said, what do you mean? You can't do it. What do you mean? You can't do it. It's targeting. It's a bounty. It's going after a player. And I asked these questions. I said, well, wait a minute now. I saw that Peyton Manning just gave every one of his linemen like Escalades. For, what is that? We saw like LaDainian Tomlinson gave all his linemen watches, Rolexes. What is that? Well, those are, and this is the answer I got. Those were for cumulative performance. This is a specific act to take out a player. We didn't want to take him out. He broke his leg. Well, was that deliberate? No. So they sent a security official to our team the next day and talked to our defensive players. And I sat in every meeting. This was an investigation. Because Bob Holtzman, my man, a friend of mine now, is standing on ESPN saying, yeah, the players are talking about gifts for the linemen for stopping Adrian Peterson. That developed into a major event, partly because he broke his leg. That's how seriously they take gambling. And then we saw it years later with the bounty case with the Saints, which had a lot of evidence against the Saints. Some craziness there, which I never saw. But that's how seriously they take it. And even to the point where a couple years later, I'm now get approached by our coaches and our scouts like, we're going to have a fantasy football draft. I'm like, no, I don't know if that's a good idea. I said, here's the rules. You can't draft a Packer and no money. And we'll just have a little draft. So I said, Leonard, you know what? That sounds very innocent, but I got to call the league because of this issue with gambling and integrity. I got to ask. So I called the league. I said, listen, we want to have a fantasy draft, and we have two rules that should insulate us, I hope, from your scrutiny. Can't draft anyone on our team, and no money. Can we do that? And I heard this long pause, and then he said to me, he said, we did not have this conversation. I said, all right, what conversation? He didn't want to know. Because if he knew and shut it down, that sounds overreaching and heavy-handed. If he didn't know, it's better. fantasy football. I know everyone's doing their drafts this week. Quick note on that. The guys who pick players for a living are the worst fantasy football players, the absolute worst. These guys are now all GMs around the NFL. They were terrible, the worst. Because you know what they would do? They would take a player that they scouted when, who's a backup. Nobody knows about this guy. I scouted him at West Texas. He's incredible. I'm like, but he's not going to play. Why would you take him? Oh, nobody knows about him. I saw him when he was a junior. I saw him doing work. I'm like, so what? He's not going to play. You idiot. Why would you take him? And of course, the people who win don't know anything. So I digressed from Rose, but you see the importance of the issue. Last point on Rose. Rose was the antithesis of the commissioner at that time. The commissioner was Bart Giamatti. He was a commissioner for a very small amount of time. He was a Yale professor turned commissioner. He was in love with baseball. He wrote poetry about baseball. Do you know people like this? They are in love with baseball. They just have this romanticism about it. I think they're nerds, but it's okay. I appreciate people's passion for things. He was that person. And he hated what Pete Rose stood for off the field. A drunk, a gambler, a womanizer, all those things. But he obviously respected his play. So you have this immovable force, Rose and Giamatti, completely different animals in terms of people. So Giamatti, it was perceived at the time and since that Giamatti was out to get him because he didn't like what he stood for as a person. And under this guise, went after him hard for gambling. This went on for a year with the report and with the appeals and with the case we talked about. Finally, it got back to the commissioner's office, and he did what he wanted to do, which was ban Pete Rose for life. For life. For betting on baseball. It happened in August, right around this time, like August 29th, 30th, whatever, 1989. And he went on vacation to Martha's Vineyard right afterward for Labor Day weekend. And whatever, stressed out with this case, he had a massive heart attack and died. Like a day after banning Pete Rose for life. It is a sad postscript to what became his definition of his commissionership was banning Pete Rose. Then he died. His son is a famous actor. I love him. In Sideways, what's Big Fat Liar, whatever. Yeah, Paul is his son. And it's just a terrible memory that, as I said, that terrible timing where he left the commissioner job. I mean, he left for a long weekend. And as I said, to put a bow on this, we are now, well, how many years is that? 27? 27 years. He's applied to be reinstated through all these commissioners. Bud Selig hated him. Now we have a new commissioner. He thought he had hope. Doesn't seem like it. The Reds, anyone from Cincinnati, they have reached out a bit. Some of these nights where he throws out a pitch or whatever. But he is no way associated with baseball. And here's the saddest sight, because I went to Cooperstown one year, Hall of Fame. It was just an incredible coincidence. I was in that area for my kids' camp. And we went there, and you go into the Hall of Fame, like right here, the Hall of Fame in baseball. And 20 yards away, outside the Hall of Fame, is Pete Rose signing memorabilia. Because that's the biggest weekend of the year, right? To sign this stuff for hundreds of thousands of dollars. But he can't do it inside. He's at a frickin' card table. Pete Rose. Not associated with baseball. It was the most stunning sight I've ever seen because they won't let him in. He gambled in the 80s. So you see how gambling was then. When we start next week, we'll talk about gambling today and daily fantasy and all that. All right, see you next week.